when Jerry invited me out, and Robin and I were talking about my career, I thought, well, okay, it's an unusual thing that I'm doing. I'm combining different things, but how do I describe it? I've been doing it for a number of years, and I'm certainly up to something, but how is it that I synthesize these worlds, and why do I do more than one thing? Many people do, but we don't often get asked about it and asked why. So as I was pondering how to come up with this, I reflected on some of the funny situations I've been in as a person with multiple careers. A couple of years ago, for instance, I was invited on a leadership conference, the Governor General's Leadership Conference, and there was a survey from our group that we were studying with before we met in person, asking each other, based on your career, what's the best advice you could give someone coming up in your field? And I thought, of all the things I've learned, not jumping off a table with a microphone in your teeth is really the best thing I've learned. But I didn't learn that working in politics, and I didn't learn that collaborating with academics who are practicing science. I learned that in a band. And I think lessons we learn from multiple fields are applicable, and we can get a lot done and contribute a lot when we bring fields together. So as I was wondering how to describe this, I came across a bizarre story, an American news story about a woman who was in a bitter dispute with her former partner over child care and questions like this. And she was actually sued to prove that she was the mother of her children, which seems bizarre. Her doctor had seen her give birth, but she submitted to a DNA test. The DNA test revealed that she was not, in fact, the mother of her children, but she was genetically the aunt of her children. But she was not, in life, the aunt of her children. This was an example of chimerism, and I may be pronouncing it wrong because I just looked it up as I came across it to think about how to describe my work and work in multiple fields. But the woman was a genetic chimera, meaning she had the DNA of a twin sister as her reproductive organs, and the rest of her body had slightly different DNA. So genetically, she was two people in one body, a chimera. There are very few documented cases of this in humans. Maybe some of you might be a chimera, I'm not sure, I'm not a geneticist, but let's imagine for a moment. But sometimes you'll be out walking on a path and you'll see someone's dog with one eye color different from the other, or sometimes in a cat we might see this. That could be an example of chimerism. There's the two different sets of genes in the animal. So when I talk about monsters at work, here I have this image of a lion with a sleepy, cute goat and a punk rock snake coming out of the lion. And this lion's not an angry lion. This is a prancing, delightful, joyful lion that just wants to be with its pride. So this is my example of a chimera, as I imagined it. The genetic term takes its name from Greek mythology. But in Greek mythology, the chimera was a scary, bizarre, abnormal monster that had to be slayed. There will be no slaying here tonight, but instead, I will use this as a metaphor, and I will discuss the benefits of being a monster in life and work and art, and how it might be a good way forward for some of us. I will talk about my work as a creature of this kind from a personal perspective, what I do, why it is that I do it, and also look at key questions about politics, the political, and the relationship between politics and art, what should that be, as well as the pressure to specialize, prioritize, and define ourselves when the politics of the moment might be calling us to do the opposite. So Jerry and Robin, in their insights into leadership and sharing narratives, asked me to share some thoughts about my origins and my core values, and where do my core values come from. So I'm originally from Cornwall, Ontario. That's a small city on the banks of the St. Lawrence River. It's not far from Montreal, though a cool artist from Montreal living in Berlin said, you can't say it's near Montreal, it's near Ottawa. So either way, it's almost equidistant. But Cornwall, a place that I love, a place that I'm from, it's a city that was industrial. Here in this photo, which is a little collage, we have a picture of Bingley Steel, which is closed down. It's been closed down for a long time. Here's the Cornwall cotton mills. They burnt down a little while ago. We were famous for textiles. And here's a little composite of not me, but a collage version of me with punk rock pink hair going to a protest. And the reason I became interested in protest and politics was watching the industrial decline of the city of Cornwall and the effects that that had. When I was a small child, I had some very tough friends. I was the geek of my class, but I was very lucky to hang out with the very tough girls who had no qualms about getting into a Donnybrook over one stink eye on the playground. So no one ever beat me up, thankfully. But when I was 11, 12, hanging out with these girls, if the peer pressure came down on you from this crew, it was not like anything else in the world. So in the summers, on one hot day, we walked down to the harbor, the Cornwall Harbor in the St. Lawrence River, and not far from Bingley Steel, pictured there actually, and they were jumping into the river. And I thought it smelt funny and it might be a bad idea. And don't get me wrong, there are some beautiful parks and beautiful beaches in and near Cornwall, but this was the harbor. It was not a beautiful park or beach. It was a former industrial area. And they insisted that I jump in. Did I think I was better than them? No, and that was the accusation, so I went right in the water. When I came out of the water, I had a taste of metal in my mouth that wouldn't go away. I went home and I showered for a long time, and it just wouldn't go away. And that impression, and looking at the city around me and seeing that some areas were more polluted than others, some smelled more like sulfur than others, and then of course standing on the riverbank in Cornwall and looking across the river at Akwesasne, a reservation, and seeing that, wow, some areas are much more polluted than others, and experiencing these consequences. And why is that? And that's wrong. So for me, a core value is thinking of the environment not just as a shared resource to enjoy, but as part of our health, part of our human health, and that equal access to opportunities in life should include the equal opportunity to be healthy and to have access to a healthy environment, which would mean fish that are not contaminated with mercury, and clean water, and that chance in life to be a healthy human being. And that's not something that I think is people should only look at as an individual, and it's my fault if I get ill. There's far too much of that kind of pressure put on people, but people should have an equal chance at this. And that's something at the core of everything that I've done that's informed my work as I've gone on. So from Cornwall, I got interested in politics and ran for office. I had a little bit of fun with that. My opponents were much older than me, and they were all guys. They were polite guys, but guys nonetheless. Here's the campaign. And here I am with my beloved St. Lawrence River right behind me. And I know a few of you here tonight are also from the banks of the St. Lawrence River, or Fleuve Saint-Laurent, where it's just a beautiful, beautiful river that is so marvelous and the source of so much inspiration. And getting interested in politics didn't just mean electoral politics. It was also really fun to go to protests, especially if there would be giant puppets. Always a highlight and a thrill. Liked to be where the puppets were. And I started to explore using metaphor to express some of the ideas, some of the difficult ideas I was becoming interested in, and using character as a way to have a debate as opposed to just write an essay. So this was the book Kill the Robot that I wrote a number of years ago, an early foray into using narrative to communicate about political issues. But when I moved to Toronto, something really wonderful and magical happened to me in that I met great people. I connected with some really fantastic communities, the arts community, the queer community, and the place where many of us came together and formed friendships was parties held by someone named Will Monroe, who passed away in the year 2010. Will was a fantastic artist. He was a friend of mine and a friend of many in Toronto and elsewhere as well. One of the things that he did that was so special wasn't just the awesome art that he made that had him longlisted for the Sobey Prize. It was the community spaces that he created, where there were none before. He created something in the late 90s called Vaseline, the rock and roll queer bar. And for that audience, queer could mean anyone who wasn't totally normal. Sure, it was queer as in lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer sexualities, but it was also punks and weirdos, people who wanted a place to hang out and dance to the Velvet Underground and dance to punk music. And his selections musically were not just about hedonism, but it was about giving us a sense of history and connection with artists who came before us and people who came before us. So here is a photo of a flyer for Vaseline that Will made. And I love this one because it's a picture of Darby Crash from the band The Germs, the punk band from the late 70s in Los Angeles. Bizarrely enough, contemporaries of the Go-Go's. And here in Darby Crash Skateboard is something that Will Monroe inserted that Darby actually didn't have, which is a big Vaseline sticker. This was the name of one of Will's parties. And I think that a lot of the wonderful art, wonderful music that came out of Toronto in the 2000s had to do with collaborations that formed on these dance floors. So I can't underestimate the impact of community. And so that got me from going on to televised debates in Cornwall into playing in bands and getting up to some mischief, and for a while doing both at once, which led to some interesting situations. One of my proudest moments in politics was having the opportunity to work for Jack Layton when he was running for a seat in Parliament in Toronto Danforth in 2004. But of course, I couldn't miss the Kids on TV photo shoot that day. The band was invited to be photographed for some publication, and we were gonna do blue face, Smurf drag, space, alien thing in a parking lot in front of some graffiti. So I had to do it because I was very briefly their guitarist because I knew a chord, the D chord, still one of my favorites. And I went into my Smurf, blue, alien, whatever it was, drag, techno robot Smurf, and finished the photo shoot. And my friend Mikey pushed me into a cab, and I got all the makeup off, or so I thought, going to the campaign office opening, a public event, smiled, welcomed people. I was the volunteer coordinator. And then, of course, afterwards, I went to the bathroom and saw these blue streaks around my ears from my Smurf drag. And I thought, okay, this can be a bit delicate, but I'm going to do this. So here's some examples of some releases with two of the bands that I was in. This is from the Hidden Cameras. There's a picture of a blue 7-inch here, and some of our logos invented by the singer and songwriter Joel Gibb. And here's the lovely CN Tower symbolizing the Toronto music that's happening here. And this is a 7-inch record by the band The Barcelona Pavilion, which was short-lived, but we had so much fun together. And the cover of this was designed by Stephen Appleby-Barr, who's a painter, and it's based on the Paris '68 posters. This one specifically is advertising not to be a sheep and don't be normal, which is kind of a theme of the talk, I guess you could say. So having a lot of fun in music, I went on tour and ended up doing a Peel session with the BBC. And at a certain point, it became difficult to balance doing electoral political campaigning with traveling with the band all the time and doing both things. So being in my early 20s back then, I could be running a campaign office or living in a van with my sweaty friends and just jamming. So I chose the sweaty van and don't regret it for a moment. So we had a great deal of fun. But I did continue my political education on the road. Here we are in a Finnish newspaper, the Barcelona Pavilion, and in the background is one of my diaries from a trip where I went from Ontario with my little suitcase over to Scandinavia and went on the highway from Gothenburg to Stockholm, and there's a little bus that I was living in. And all of this was a lot of fun, but also it was a great opportunity for me to meet people from other political systems, finding out what does a social democracy look like on the ground? What does it mean for the arts? What does it mean for the people living there? So it was another form of continuing my education after university. And I got so excited about all these travels that my next band, Republic of Safety, a punk band again, we made our own little nation that anyone could be part of. Anytime there was a gig, we were a republic, and this was our passport. I have a photo here of our passport. But you couldn't have your own passport photo in the passport. You could get a passport very easily, but it would have a band member's face in it. So this was an early stage of trying to synthesize some political ideas and political learnings while balancing a life of activism and music. When I came back from a lot of the touring, I still do some music, but I don't live in a van anymore. I spend most of my days at an environmental NGO and do art when I'm not at the NGO and it's pretty much 50-50. It's a lot of both, and I'm really enjoying doing both. So I returned, though, wanting to do nonpartisan work. So I left politics a number of years ago in the mid-2000s and got involved in the environmental NGO movement. I've worked on climate change before, and currently I'm working on the issue of endocrine disrupting chemicals, many of which are suspected carcinogens. So what's all this about environmental activism? Well, activism and art have some things in common, or campaigning and theater more specifically. You can imagine and present alternate futures if you want to win a campaign. Now, this is not prescriptive for art, because art can be pretty much anything, and there don't have to be rules and goals associated with it. But I do like to make that kind of art, and but don't mean to prescribe things for other people. But what is the similarity between running a campaign, being an activist, trying to achieve a social movement goal, or social change, or regulatory change, and thinking of things as a narrative? Presenting an alternate future is crucial. We're in the present. If you're committed to social change, if you're some kind of activist, there's something about the present that you're not content with the status quo. You want to change it. So what does that change look like? That's a very important part of it, is imagining your idea of what the future could be, or other possibilities. Campaigning to change expectations and present these alternatives as viable is a crucial part of engaging with the public on an issue. And communicating on the level of the practical and the factual, and advocating for evidence-based policy, though values do play a role, are really key to the type of environmental activism that I engage in. So that means doing research about what scientists are saying, trying to assess if the evidence is suggesting that a certain chemical poses a problem for human health, and if the evidence is mounting that it does, acting on that to try to ban or phase out those chemicals. So that's looking at truths that have a true or false quality to them, unlike kind of greater fantastical truths that literature can approach, where it's not yes or no, true or false, but something more complex. So it's another kind of truth, and it's another method of approaching the truth. So like a play or a band, a campaign also has an audience. Who is the audience? Here's an example of a campaign think-through I've done recently for looking at the issue of endocrine disrupting chemicals. I've got my villains set up here. The chemicals are the villains. So triclosan, that's a key villain. Formaldehyde, oh yeah, that would have to be played by someone really vicious. Flame retardants, the name suggests that they're good, but some of them are actually quite harmful to human health and the environment, and some of them have even been banned, but are still in many of our homes. Parabens, they mimic estrogen, and estrogen exposure over a woman's lifetime is tied to breast cancer risk. And phthalates, these are in many products without actually being named, and they trigger asthma. One phthalate is carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. And when I look at these little villains and I plot them in a circle, then I think, who's the audience I need to talk about these chemicals with? Who needs to know about these villains? And so here's my notes from my sketchbook. And I've plotted out this thought process the same way I would plot out a play, almost exactly the same, but with some slight differences. Now, this isn't how every environmental campaigner works, but the idea of campaigning as storytelling is really growing in political movements and social movements and in the NGO world. And even in not-for-profit fundraising, storytelling is more and more of a theme. So those of you who are working in the arts who aren't also working for charitable organizations might be very interested to know that. And so your ways of thinking, you might step outside and think, oh, is this applicable to raising money? Maybe it is. So, but again, it's not prescriptive. It's just a way of doing things. So what should the relationship between art and the political be? This is a question for the ages. It's one that I don't have the answer to. It's one that I'm experimenting with. And it's one that many artists I admire have experimented with. I don't only like political art, but a lot of the art that I do like does try to communicate a certain value or a certain kind of truth that has implications for justice and equal access to opportunities in the world. And some art starts out without the intention to communicate for justice, and either by virtue of how it's made or by virtue of who listens to it, can end up as a tool for justice. For instance, a lot of soul music coming out of Stax Records at one time in the South, in the US, was meant to be good music that people could enjoy. But because making that music involved racial integration and breaking down barriers between Black and white Americans to get that music out there, that was a force for social change because of how it was made, even though what we hear on the record might just be a love song, and that's a wonderful thing. So I mentioned with the previous slide looking at the sketchbook that showed the villains, the chemicals that I treat as villains in my work to advocate for evidence-based policy to ban carcinogens in my NGO life. We've talked a little bit about setting up some of those chemicals to ban as heroes and villains. And the alternate version of the future for that work that I do would be a world where carcinogens and endocrine disrupting chemicals, that means chemicals that mimic human hormones, are not a part of our daily lives to the extent that they are now. But there's also this aspect of the possible and the impossible. So what we perceive of as imminent and actual and probably going to happen versus that which seems like it would never happen. And this is something where I think there are some key differences between politics, especially the electoral political, and art. And this is with electoral politics expressed as working on the level of desire and compromise. To work in that arena and gain votes and hold office, you have to talk to people, or it would be recommended to talk to people about various possibilities for getting what they want. So if we raise taxes, we can pave more roads. You want more roads, right? It's working on that level of desire. Or to take something less real, an example, say people wanted unicorns in the streets, and one party was offering 1,000 unicorns in the streets, and some people thought that was messy, and so another party offered one unicorn in the street. What is in the realm of what the public wants, if it's a number of unicorns, you're working within what's possible to provide, considering what people want. No one would be entering into that election about unicorns saying, we are the ban unicorns party totally. Or someone might, but they wouldn't be trying to court votes by banning unicorns. If you force something on people that they don't want in electoral politics, if it's something that so few people want and it's awful, that's oppressive, and that's not democracy. So when you work outside of what's conceivably possible and you do something that harms people's sensibilities and desires, that's oppressive. And that's a short summary of that way of doing things in politics, and it's a larger topic. When is it necessary to implement certain conditions? That's a debate for another time, or maybe over drinks later, I'm not sure. But the difference with art is that you can present something that people don't want in art, and you're not oppressing them if you make an ugly poster, or if you make a kind of painting in a style that a person doesn't want to see. It's not anti-democratic to hang that painting on a wall. You can work outside of what is considered possible and desirable, excluding people on the matter of taste. If you make top 40 music and I don't like top 40 music, that's okay. It's a different matter when you're presenting art that people might not like and might not desire. So there's different aspects of what can be done in art. And with art, you can actually expand the desires that people have. So that's, to me, an important consideration in the interplay between art and politics. With politics, you're talking about different formulations for what people can already accept. And in art, you're talking about things that people haven't even necessarily thought of yet. Not all art, but sometimes you're doing something totally radical that has never been conceived of before. I was speaking with a lovely painter from Montreal today who's trying to push painting to the limits in a new way. And that's a wonderful thing in art. So another thing that can be done for that reason is you can communicate on the level of desires to expand that realm of desire, to expand what it is that people might possibly want and accept from life. That's communicating on the level of culture and the power of culture. Another key thing that art can do to impact politics, specifically literature or narrative art, is to help us imagine other people's lives and build community and solidarity as a result of that. In philosophy, activism, and politics, there's a lot of debate about identity and who has what identity, or how do these identities get tied up with oppression and inequality. And that's a huge discussion, and it's tied to the difference between being able to know a person's pain or not to be able to know a person's pain. And that's an important debate in the political realm. But in literature, we start on the first page imagining that we can know another person's pain. And it's outside of that type of debate. In literature, we start immediately imagining another person's life, or in narrative. You imagine what it is to be that character, and that's okay. And so that opens up this whole world of possibility for building sympathy, community, and understanding between people, and to build the solidarity that's necessary to actually change the world. Because people don't change the world alone, they do it together, and in many different ways. So if you're thinking about making political art like I am, and it's still in progress for me, I still think about what's the best way to go about this, who to look to. Sometimes we might be looking for role models. And there's many different ways to engage with politics as an artist, from Buffy St. Marie breastfeeding on Sesame Street, a totally political act, to musicians uniting against apartheid and supporting boycotts, to artists like Václav Havel, a playwright, actually becoming president of the Czech Republic. There's so many different examples. But it's not every day that we see artists in parliament or standing for office and engaging with the electoral political. So it's still quite a complicated topic. Parliament's full of lawyers and some doctors, but a few artists, not very many. I'd love to see more for so many reasons. But, oh yes, someone agreeing with me. I hope that more will consider it. So how do we make art that communicates for social change without making terrible art? Among these people that I might look to for inspiration, I look at some of the films of Godard, the French filmmaker from the 60s, 70s, and he's still alive making films today. And some of Godard's films are awesome and adventurous. For instance, Breathless. It's a classic crime story of a guy who admires Humphrey Bogart running away with a beautiful woman. And then you get to some of his other films, and they're just diatribes. Maybe some of you like that, but it's not exactly what I think of as his best work. So sometimes when we just try to make art didactic, it might not be good art anymore. And there has to be space to make art outside of the political questions and outside of having a purpose even. There must be room for just experimentation and going to a place that's new. So, but I think the best way to try to make art that communicates for social justice and change is to just make art and try not to be boring, unless that's the goal. And again, art does communicate on that level of values rather than true false truths. So while I might start my day looking at environmental policies that would reflect how to prevent people from being contaminated by certain chemicals, what I'm looking to is, what does the World Health Organization say? What do those scientists in the WHO say about what's likely to cause cancer, and therefore what we shouldn't be exposed to? But for trying to understand why in the first place some are exposed and some are not, I try to look to literature and the arts for answers about what it is that humans have in common, what we need from each other. My own attempts at making art that communicates for social and environmental justice are works in progress. And I do it with some help from my friends, a lot of help from my friends. Many of my works are collaborative. So I've discussed a little bit the work I do in the environmental world and how campaigning is storytelling. Now I'm going to discuss with you a little bit of the work that I've done that is specifically art that has some of these ideas and values bound up in it. And it's quite different from the work that I do on environmental policy. So first, this is a picture of my collaborator, Stephanie Markowitz, who all the work I've done in theater in the last 8 years, I've worked with very closely, with Stephanie very closely as a director, as a dramaturg. She's fantastic. And another collaborator in the middle of this photo, it's Glenn Gould. Though he was dead before I came to know his music, I think we're always collaborating with those who came before us if they influence us. It's a kind of collaboration. So here I am with two collaborators. And here's a piece that I made with Stephanie. It became a musical, but it started as these sketchbooks. I overheard a fantastic conversation in Vistas, which is the place where we're eating in Banff when we're here in residency, I heard a fantastic conversation between a playwright and a dramaturg from the UK talking about the issue of how do you express an issue like climate change in a story, in a play? How do you do that? And it's a really important question. And the two individuals I was listening to were saying things that totally resonate with me, and I try to enact in my approach. And along those lines, I think putting things into the form of a character in a story, rather than just presenting it as an issue, is an important way to go forth so that it can actually communicate and resonate with people. So in the mid-2000s, when I first became quite concerned about the climate crisis and climate change and what would this mean for humanity, I wrote a story called The Rat King, and it started as a sketchbook. So here's a very weird circus at the end of the world after it's been summer for about 40 years and it's blazing hot. That's how The Rat King begins. And then there's a massive flood because of global oceans rising, the Antarctic ice melting, and it's just the worst possible dystopia it could be. But the story is really about this little boy who's raised by rats, because as now one scientist at least has suggested might be possible, in this dystopia, it's not cockroaches, but rats that take over. So here he is with the rats that took over, trying to have a kind of a family. And The Rat King is a musical about his story. And one of the things that we did, Stephanie and I, with The Rat King, is we took people from our music community, the music scene in Toronto, and asked them to play the parts as actors, so getting artists out of their place. We were very inspired, and I still continue to be inspired, by John Waters walking around Baltimore, pulling people out of thrift stores to play main roles in his movies, and that camp quality, that playful quality that happens there. But it's not for everybody. When we took this show to New York in 2007, one of our worst reviews, and they were all bad, said, and there are no real actors in the show. So I agreed with that remark. There were no real actors in the show. But I was okay with that, so there was some difference of opinion. Of course, it's always an experiment and trying to go forward and doing new things. I started to think, I took a trip with the British Council's TN 2020 group, which is a group that got European and North American youth, young professionals together to learn about issues. We went to Northern Ireland, we went to Belfast, and people did various workshops. Some people got to hang out with children as they re-envisioned flags for Northern Ireland, and took a look at the natural world and thought a lot about how generational change, political change, is similar to natural succession in a way. When you go to a monument, visit a monument of a historical thing that's happened, specifically a war monument, it's meant to mark the ending of something that happened. So specifically here, this is the Treptower Park monument in Berlin, which is in Treptow. It's a vast monument, and it was meant to mark when the Soviets saved Germany from the Nazis. And we know from women, feminists who've campaigned about this issue, who tell us that this is actually a more complicated story because many women were raped in that process, and there's a lot to it. And it didn't necessarily mark the ending. It's a monument, and around that monument you see that poplar trees are growing. And while the monument says one thing, the poplar trees say another, because in natural succession, not selection, in natural succession, after a fire, the poplar trees are the first trees that will grow. And poplars don't live that long. They live for about 70 years. So when you see a monument marking the end of something, but then you see poplars all around it, a bit faded in the image I have here, the poplars say that this wasn't that long ago. And so generationally, what happened here is not necessarily fully over. So I did this music project with Republic of Safety, the punk band that was a fake nation. I put together some art to reflect this theme of natural succession and political succession and generational change by doing an illustration of the Treptower Park monument inside a sleeve that had a partial illustration of the same monument surrounded by poplar trees. But when you place the cover on the inner drawing, neither one is fully clear. And when we get closer to trying to apprehend historical objects, getting closer doesn't necessarily make history any clearer. So that was that project. And then a little bit more recently, I worked on some of the issues coming from the St. Lawrence River that has inspired me so much to look at how that economic change and the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the departure of these industries affect people on a personal level. So this image here is of an EP of music that I created with some friends. And it's a picture of two boys on the riverbank in Cornwall, Ontario. And the river that they sit by here, there's an image of the river. That's the St. Lawrence River in that region after the inundation of the rapids to create the St. Lawrence Seaway. And Cornwallites were promised that ships would be able to bring much more industry on their way into the Great Lakes, and it would be wonderful for our economy, whereas ships used to stop at Montreal. But what happened was that business just moved further inland to the Great Lakes. So that promise of the Seaway didn't actually manifest. And this is a story being told and retold in many communities in North America as industries leave and towns are left with what industry leaves behind, but not those jobs any longer. So the benefits of hosting those industries are not there anymore. And with this overlay, it was silk screened by Cheryl Chung, and the illustration on top is the St. Lawrence River now, and underneath is what the St. Lawrence River used to look like. And when you're there on the banks of the St. Lawrence River, you're there with the history of it as well as the present. And this is my second most recent play. The most recent I'll talk about in conclusion, but again, an attempt to use music. And I've been advised maybe not to describe what I do as musicals, because then people expect jazz hands and guys and dolls, not necessarily drag queens and robots and things like that. So plays with music or performance works with music. It's one of the things that I do. And this attempt is Young Drones. I did this project with Stephanie Markowitz, illustrator Amy Siegel, and Toronto band The Bicycles for Summerworks Theatre Festival last year. Some of you might, of course, know Summerworks very well. The Bicycles were invited to do the music program, and they asked me to create a story for them and then work on some music with them. At the time, I'd just been to the Brussels Forum, which is a gathering in Europe with lots of people from the EU and the United States talking about security issues. It's very much an electoral, political type people and policymakers event. And I was picking up issues of foreign affairs and feeling concerned about the proliferation of drones, but how do we address this issue? There's so many questions to it. There's the philosophical question of technological neutrality. Can any technology actually be neutral? Is a sword also possibly a plowshare, or is a sword just a sword? And of course, the more imminent questions of whether it's possible to use these things morally. So instead of having a dry essay, like one response to this issue might be, we created this play about two predator drones who are created to patrol Alberta, here in this region. But the drones become conscientious objectors. They sing to each other. And of course, music is not used just to entertain here. It's used to take the audience outside of the do I agree with this or not framework and just be experiencing the music for a moment and receiving it on a different level. So Young Drones was our musical about predator drones in love. And I won't tell you how it ends, but they do refuse to kill. And it's a pretty cute story about robots if you're ever going to get one. And we'll be doing this show again at Summerworks this year at the new festival. So these have been some of my experiments in trying to make art that is political while also working in activism and balancing these worlds. So, but many of you do more than one thing. Actually, could people in the audience, and I'll describe for radio, I'm going to ask if people who have more than one job, more than one profession, could just raise their hand for a moment. So actually quite a few people in the room. I would say more than at least half, or possibly more than half, of people in the room have more than one profession. So people who do more than one thing, if you do one thing, that's wonderful and awesome. If you do more than one thing, you'll know that it has its drawbacks and its challenges. One drawback is that it can slow your progress down any given path. So if you're trying to train to be a master painter and you take out part of your day every day to work as an accountant, that's really going to slow down your work towards being a master painter, just for any example. And at parties, you really confuse people. People always ask at parties, what is it that you do? and then struggling to answer. I do lunch, I do brunch. And how on earth do you fill in a LinkedIn page? I don't know if many of the artists in the house tonight have a LinkedIn page, but it is very hard. And LinkedIn is a really important thing for finding a job in an office and navigating that professional world. But recently I was trying to fill mine in to describe my relationship with Stephanie Markowitz, because I was giving her a recommendation. She's my collaborator in art. We do art together. And it was asking me, is she a client? Did she work for another company? And how do you describe that? So we're constantly being pressured to define and sort our careers, and I would say sort them in a hierarchical manner. In the arts world, very often artists who have professional jobs or have jobs of any kind might be asked, what's your day job? And maybe our friends just mean that to be very supportive, but sometimes that question implies that one should be more important than the other. Or if you're working in an office and at night you're going off with your band or with your theater crew or painting, your office mates might say, what's your hobby? And very well intentioned, but the assumption is that your 9 to 5 is your life and everything else is your hobby. But of course, if it's not your hobby, it's your passion and it's your whole, it's quite a meaningful aspect of your existence, intrinsic to who you are. It's not your hobby, and that question might hurt a little bit. So there are some drawbacks to being a chimera and being an animal that has many different parts. And it seems like social attitudes towards interdisciplinarity, or artists might say transmedia, or having a diverse set of professions, attitudes are changing, and that's represented in the way that people with multiple tasks ahead of them are described. Just to clarify, and to introduce this point, I will describe here David Bowie. I have a photo of David Bowie's album, Pinups, great album, lots of fun, set beside a sketch, early sketch of a chimera, the prancing happy lion with its little goat on its back and a little snake. And the difference between this chimera and David Bowie, many people, if you Google search the meaning of the word chimera, as I did very recently to prepare for this, describe David Bowie as a chimera because he has one eye color different from the other. But David Bowie was actually stabbed in the eye with a pencil by a friend as a kid, and one of his pupils doesn't dilate, so, or dilates differently than the other. But why bring this all back to David? Is it just to make you think of the song Rebel Rebel in your head, or picture Ziggy Stardust? No, there's a point. Artists, recently, I've noticed a couple of critical reviews, one about Sherry Boyle when she was on her way to Venice for the Biennale, that called her practice polymathic. So polymath used to mean something rather different. A polymath meant a person with very, very, very different professions. So someone who was a doctor and a mathematician and perhaps a painter. Someone like George Washington Carver, the American who invented peanut butter, who also had a few very different practices as well. And, or Hypatia, the mathematician from a very long time ago, many thousands of, hundreds of years ago, a long time. Hypatia was a mathematician and a philosopher and an astronomer. And that's what polymath meant or means. It's a word that seems to be in transition. Recently, Sherry Boyle's practice was described by a reviewer in the Globe and Mail as polymathic because she does sculpture and painting and other forms of this practice. And as well, in an article, a London critic was writing about Miranda July and referred to her as a polymath as well because she's a sculptor and an author, and she makes films as well. So these two artists are, without question, amazing artists doing lots of different types of things. But if an artist doing different types of art is a polymath now, what does that mean about our attitude towards people who have multiple careers? I don't know the answer to that question, but I sense that it's in flux and it's currently changing. And so what do we do with that change? At the end of the day, the takeaway here is that the world needs both types of people. We need the dragon slayers, so the specialists who lock the door and study mathematics for 12 hours a day to solve problems and only do math and eat breakfast and shower, go to bed and wake up and do math. And we need people who are specializing at pushing their art to the limit, just taking painting to a new place and taking it to a new place and doing something new that's specialized in a field. We need those people in our lives, in this species. We need that. But we also need monsters. And by monsters, I mean these creatures that are more than one thing. We need the lion, snake, goat, cobra, lionfish, amphibian, lizard, friendly cat. We need people who are these things. Because chimeras can bring these worlds together. The chimera can go hang out with a mathematician and maybe not do math as awesome as that mathematician, but they can do lunch. And then they can go and do lunch or dinner with the painter and talk about what they've learned and share that and bring those fields together. And the world really does need that right now. So here's this little imaginary friend, the goat, who likes to read the different things and is curious about a few different subjects. The happy community-oriented lion and the punk rock snake cooperating to bring a few different themes together. I'd like to end this on a positive outlook, even though I'm going to talk about something depressing. So what is it that artists and activism, what is one of the key things that artists and activists have in common? Feelings of hopelessness, sometimes. For an activist who's confronted with something as awful as the climate crisis, or any citizen really, we're in the midst of global change. We're being told dire things by the IPCC. Scientists are pulling alarms all over the place, and we are seeing weather changing. And weather is not climate, but they're related, and we're seeing more extremes more of the time. We're already seeing people's homes inundated, and we're seeing the effects of climate change now. And scientists are telling us it's only going to get worse. And we're also hearing about extinctions that are tied to this. For instance, in my own lifetime, when I was a little child, I lived by a creek in Cornwall. And any spring or summer or fall even, I could walk through the grass and hear hundreds of frogs jumping at my feet to try to get away from my awkward little shoes. And only a few years later, there was less and less. And now when I go to those same places, there are no frogs. And it's tied to a few different things, for instance, a fungus, but there is some suspicion that this is linked to climate change and what's happening now in our environment. And we're seeing a lot of species on the decline. And that's a crisis. It's without question an overwhelming and depressing crisis. And when we're confronting this, we feel sad. Climate change isn't just a scientific problem for that dragon slayer engineer who's looking for the clean energy future, locked up in a room doing her math all day. It's not just a problem for her. It's also a problem for people in culture, because we have to grapple with those feelings of hopelessness and that despair to be able to confront it and to be able to change. And who can grapple with feelings of despair better than artists? Artists are awesome at that. And we're experts at dealing with feelings of despair. And not just in the sense of the ideas of artists being blue or being tied to or being more sensitive and whatnot, but also in the same way that an activist engaged in a campaign might feel, oh, my campaign is hopeless. I'm never going to ban this chemical. We're never going to stop this climate crisis. That cycle of hopelessness that one just has to go through and keep going, to err on the side of caution, because if you err on the other side, you might get the same result, but it'll feel a lot worse. Artists also go through this feeling, and I speak as from my own experience as an artist here, but also as somebody who has lots of artist friends and is tied to that community. There's often a feeling of worry that, what if my work doesn't connect with people? What if my work fails to resonate? What if no one engages with my art? What if I can't get it out there and nobody likes this play that I'm writing, or nobody likes what I'm doing? And that feeling of hopelessness that cycles through one's life when creating art is similar to that activist feeling of hopelessness. But it's something that chimeras can bond together to deal with and try to transmit messages of hope to help us out. So I'm going to end with a little example of my most recent attempt to synthesize all these different worlds in one work, which takes the form of a work of art, but was meant as a comedy, as a therapeutic for activists and for artists to deal with those feelings of hopelessness. And it's just my most recent experiment in my life, my career, which is a work in progress as a weird, happy monster. So when I look at what's very important to me, it's not just community and people, but also music. I love music so much, and it's so powerful. Just as love is stronger than death, music is also stronger than death. in that it can persist over the ages, long after an artist dies. We can hear their voice, and even if we don't speak the same language and we don't know what those words mean exactly, we can be moved by that. And music has the power, and other art forms too, to communicate beyond death, possibly even beyond extinction. So reading about extinction so much, flipping through my copy of The Weathermakers by Tim Flannery, or flipping through picture books of people's fallout shelters, this is from Waiting for the End of the World, and listening to the Human League to feel better about it all. Not political art, but if it makes you feel better, that's an excellent thing. And of course, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, You Don't Know What You've Got Till It's Gone. Great environmental song, even if that's not how it was intended. I came up with metaphor of an astronaut after human extinction. Imagine being absolutely the last human being alive. In this case, this artist is looking to reassure herself, with the help of her robot, that all is not lost through the power of music. That's not her intent when she starts out. She lives in a capsule, a desolate little capsule, her escape pod, which she left by stealing it from Cape Canaveral, with just a little cot, an amp, a guitar, and a microphone, for which she plays music to the emptiness of space as she looks for other human beings by sharing the music she likes with them. How did the human race die in this play, which is No One Receiving? It was performed at Buddies, the fantastic theater Buddies, at the Rhubarb Festival just this year. So how do we persist, and why did we die? And these questions are tied up with each other. Here, in No One Receiving, the human race died out almost completely because human beings were told by friendly aliens, or would-be friendly aliens, that top 40 music was killing their planet. So these aliens from Epsilon Geysi send us a message and say, look, we can't take it anymore. We liked the old stuff, but this top 40 music is literally making us suicide, and you have to stop broadcasting top 40 within 3 years, or we'll blow up your whole planet, in self-defense. So this is not meant to insult people who like top 40. In the course of the play, we discuss the merits of some of these songs if it makes people feel better. But the earth is blown up because, of course, the recording industry and governments get together to talk about it for 3 years, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. So Earth is gone. One little astronaut's drifting about in space, looking for signs of life. There are no signs of life. There's no signs of fellow humans. It's hopeless, but she persists and keeps going, looking for those humans. And what does she find but a capsule, a satellite? It crashes into her ship, and it's so exciting because maybe there are people on board. Could there be other people finally out in space? Will the human race survive this near extinction? She gets into the capsule, and she doesn't find a single human being, not even a spider. But what the astronaut finds in the capsule is one golden record, a record with music on it made in gold. This is a model or a mock-up of an actual golden record that NASA, scientists collaborating with artists, in this case historians, musicologists, and musicians, created a golden record in the 70s to go up on a Voyager satellite into outer space. So there would be some record of human culture and human life all out there beyond the solar system, drifting about in the solar winds. So there really is a golden record, and you can hear some of the wonderful music on it if you go to YouTube and Google Voyager golden record. So the astronaut only finds the golden record, which seems like a reason to despair. Okay, I put my art out there, I put my campaign out there, the human race still died, what do we do? But music is this force of hope, and it's the kind of collaboration and force for culture that does communicate beyond all things. And that's something that culture has the power to do. So the astronaut wasn't totally devastated because music is awesome and art is awesome. So the lesson of the talk, the takeaway, is that we need the dragon slayers who do the one thing, but we also need the totally weirdo monsters to be happy, wonderful monsters at work, bringing the diverse fields together, tying those threads together, and aiming to make it all make sense in some way by bringing people together. So I hope that all the other happy monsters and dragon slayers out there tonight in the audience will have enjoyed something that I brought to you tonight, and I thank you so much for listening to me for so long. So there's now a portion for question and answer. I thank you very much for your applause. If anyone has any questions, I can take questions at either microphone.
I have a question. First, I just want to say it's very inspiring, all the hats that you wear and all the things that you're passionate about. And it was wonderful to see reflected in this room how many people have passionate careers in more than one field. And so one of my careers is as a mother, and therefore my question to you is, what were your parents like in that you were able to somehow, you know, have this fertile ground in which you could say, I can be this and I can be this. They can all come together or not. They can all go towards one direction or not in a society which, as you said, from LinkedIn is often saying, let's be hierarchical about this. Let's fit everyone in a shoebox. I'd like to hear a little bit about whether that influenced how you became who you were.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my parents are very interesting and possibly unique people. I love them so much, and they've been very supportive. I think that just the crucial thing is that they're loving and kind and supportive, and encouraged me to be open-minded. My mother is also a political activist. She's an activist in the labor movement, and so her stories inspire me quite a lot. And my father absolutely loves great music. So I think between that, I was very lucky. So my father made me listen to Patti Smith and the Rolling Stones before I was allowed to put on my punk records when I got a record player for Christmas. So I think that that was helpful. But at the heart of it, they were just really supportive.
Thanks so much for your talks. Fantastic. I just have a question about activist burnout. If you could talk about that, and also this idea of, you're talking about hopelessness, and if you, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, but I've read about this concept of learned helplessness, where they do these tests on the dog, and then no matter what the dog does, it loses control of the consequence of whatever's happening in the experiment. But if you can talk about that, if you know anything about that, and activist burnout.
Yeah, activist burnout is such an important topic, and it's something that we don't discuss enough. And I was having a great chat the other day with someone who is both an artist and a political activist herself. And she was talking about how hard it is to say no to things when people ask you to participate in something for a good cause. Because if you care about many issues, and at the heart of it you care about equality and equal access to the material necessities of life, we're in a whole world of problems, challenges that stand in the way of that. And so it can be very hard to say no, and also to put aside time for yourself and practice self-care. So for me, engaging in art that has a community element to it, working with friends, doing music with friends, having strong community ties is a way to try to avoid burnout. But it's a really serious issue, and it's one that we need to talk about more. And it's, I definitely don't have the answer to it, but I think that we need to take care of each other and see if we're meeting our limits and try to help each other out.